She wrote plain, unremarkable, forgettable in her letters. He wrote back, I'm not looking for beauty, I'm looking for honesty. But when she stepped off that stagecoach in 1878, his first words shattered everything she believed about herself. This is the story of a woman who spent 30 years learning to see what one man saw from the very first moment. A story about being seen, truly seen for the first time. Before we begin, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to a spring morning in Montana, 1922. You're wrong about yourself. He saw beauty where she saw nothing. A 30-year transformation. The cottonwoods along the creek were leafing out in that brilliant green that only exists for a few weeks each spring. Elena Ashford sat on the wooden bench beside her husband's grave, her weathered hands resting on the sun-warmed stone of his headstone. At 74, she moved slowly these days. Her joints protested the morning chill. Her back curved from decades of ranch work. The silver in her hair caught the early light as she settled herself more comfortably against the bench Daniel's grandson had built 5 years ago. Good morning, my love, she said quietly, as she had done nearly every day for the past 12 years. It's a beautiful morning, the kind you always loved. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the distance. The creek whispered over stones. Life continued as it always did, indifferent and beautiful. Elena was quiet for a long moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She'd come here with something to say, something she'd been thinking about for weeks now. I've been remembering that first day. She began, her voice soft but steady. When I stepped off the stagecoach, absolutely terrified. I was so certain I'd be a disappointment to you, Daniel. So certain that when you saw me, really saw me, you'd regret everything. She smiled, touching the headstone gently. Instead, you looked at me and saw everything I couldn't see in myself. And you never stopped looking at me that way. Not for 32 years, not for a single day. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of new grass and distant pine. You were right about everything you know. You were right when you said I was beautiful. Right when you said I was strong. Right when you said I just needed to learn to see myself clearly. Elena paused, gathering her thoughts. The weariness she'd been feeling lately settled deeper into her bones, but it wasn't frightening. It felt almost like peace. When done. It took me so long to believe you, too long probably, but I got there eventually, didn't I? I learned to see what you saw. And Daniel, that gift you gave me, teaching me my own worth, I passed it on. Rose knows. The grandchildren know. They won't waste years doubting themselves the way I did. She sat quietly watching the play of light on the creek below, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. Their ranch, hers and Daniel's, and now their children's, spread out before her in gentle waves of land they'd worked with their own hands. I'm tired, my love, she admitted softly. So tired. And I miss you. I've missed you every single day for 12 years. But I kept my promise. I lived. I really lived. I watched our grandchildren grow. I helped Rose and Thomas build something even bigger than what we started. I remembered who I was, who you taught me to be. The sun climbed higher, warming the spring air. Elena felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like completion. I think I'm ready now, she whispered. Ready to rest. Ready to see you again if that's possible. I hope it is. I hope you're waiting somewhere, ready to tell me I'm beautiful one more time. She leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes against the bright morning sun. In her mind, she could hear his voice as clearly as if he stood beside her. You're wrong about yourself, Elena. You're wrong. And she smiled because after 30 years of patient teaching, she'd finally learned he was right. Let me tell you how it all began, she murmured, her voice growing softer. Let me tell you about a girl who believed she was nothing special, and the man who saw her, truly, 32 years earlier. Fall 1878, Idaho Territory. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Morrison's General Store, and Elena Hartwell pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat to steady herself. Through the dust-clouded window, she could see the rough outline of Silver Creek, a collection of weathered buildings huddled together like strangers seeking warmth. The Idaho Territory stretched beyond the town in endless waves of sagebrush and distant mountains, beautiful and utterly indifferent. Her stomach twisted. She'd imagined this moment of 1,000 times during the journey west. In her mind, it had always been cleaner somehow, more dignified. She'd pictured herself stepping down gracefully, her traveling dress somehow unmarred by 2 weeks of dust and sweat. She'd imagined feeling brave. Instead, she felt small. Silver Creek Miss, the driver called down, his voice hoarse from days of shouting over rattling wheels and wind. End of the line. Elena gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that held everything she owned. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the clasp on her bag. Through the window, she could see people moving along the wooden boardwalk. Men, mostly their faces weathered by sun and wind. A few women in simple dresses. Everyone looked purposeful, like they belonged exactly where they were. She did not feel like she belonged. The door opened and the driver offered his hand. Elena took it, stepping down into the autumn afternoon. The air smelled of wood smoke and horse's dust and something green she couldn't name. The wind tugged at her bonnet. "You being met, miss?" the driver asked, setting her trunk beside her on the boardwalk. "Yes, I believe so." The driver tipped his hat and climbed back up to his seat. Within moments, the stagecoach was rolling away, leaving Elena standing alone with her belongings and the weight of every choice that had brought her here. She'd answered an advertisement in a Philadelphia newspaper 6 months ago. The words were burned into her memory. Rancher in Idaho Territory seeks honest woman of good character for marriage. Must be willing to work hard and build a life on the frontier. No beauty required, only strength of spirit. That last line had caught her. No beauty required. It felt like permission. Elena had never been beautiful. She knew this the way she knew the sky was blue, a simple fact established early and confirmed often. Her face was too round, her features too plain. Her figure was sturdy rather than graceful. In Philadelphia, men's eyes had slid past her in parlors and at church socials, always landing on someone else, someone prettier, someone worth noticing. So when she'd written her first letter to Daniel Ashford, she'd been honest, painfully honest. She described herself as plain and unremarkable, a woman of simple education who could read and write and manage a household, but would never turn heads or inspire poetry. She'd made herself smaller on the page than she already felt in life, hoping that lowered expectations might spare them both disappointment. His response had surprised her. "Miss Hartwell," he'd written in careful, measured script, "I'm not looking for poetry or turned heads. I'm looking for a partner. Someone who understands that life out here is hard, but can be good with the right person beside you. Your honesty tells me more about your character than any flattery could. If you're willing to take a chance on a ranch in rough country and a man who's better with cattle than words, I'd be honored to have you." They'd exchanged letters through the summer. His were short but sincere, telling her about the ranch he'd built over 5 years of backbreaking work, the small herd he was building, the cabin that needed a woman's touch. He wrote about loneliness without shame, about wanting children someday, about believing that good marriages were built on respect and shared purpose rather than romance. Elena had found herself trusting those letters, trusting him. And now she was here 2,000 miles from everything familiar, waiting to meet a man whose face she'd never seen. "Miss Hartwell." The voice came from behind her, low and careful. Elena turned. He stood at the edge of the boardwalk, hat in his hands. Tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by work and a face weathered by wind and sun. His hair was dark, curling slightly at his collar. His eyes were gray-blue, the color of the sky before a storm, and they were looking directly at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Mr. Ashford," she managed. "Daniel," he said, stepping closer. "Just Daniel." He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His features were too rough, his jaw too strong, his hands too marked by labor. But there was something solid about him, something steady. He looked like a man who kept his word. "Elena," she said quietly, though she supposed he already knew that. "I did." He turned his hat in his hands and she realized he was nervous. Somehow that made her feel better. "Was the journey difficult?" "Long," she said. "But I'm here." "You are." He looked at her for a long moment, and Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks. She wanted to look away, to escape that steady gaze, but something held her there. "I'm glad," he said finally. She didn't know what to say to that. Daniel seemed to sense her uncertainty. He moved to pick up her trunk, lifting it easily despite its weight. "The wagon's just there. It's about an hour to the ranch. We can talk on the way, get to know each other some before." He trailed off, color touching his weathered cheeks. Before we're married, Elena finished softly. Yes, ma'am. They walked to the wagon in silence. It was sturdy and practical, the bed lined with straw and covered with canvas. Daniel secured her trunk, then offered his hand to help her up to the seat. His palm was calloused and warm through her glove. As he climbed up beside her and gathered the reins, Elena studied him from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own body, no wasted motion. When he clicked his tongue and the horses started forward, his hands were gentle on the leather. They left Silver Creek behind, the road narrowing to two ruts cutting through the sagebrush. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already touched with early snow. The land rolled and dipped, vast and open, in a way that made Elena's chest feel tight. It's beautiful, she said, because the silence was becoming uncomfortable. It can be, Daniel said. Hard too. Winters are brutal. Summers are long and dry. The work never stops. You wrote about that. I did. He glanced at her. Wanted you to know what you were getting into. Didn't seem right to paint it prettier than it is. I appreciated that. Elena folded her hands in her lap. I tried to do the same in my letters. Something shifted in his expression. You describe yourself as plain, he said quietly. Elena's throat tightened. I am. You're wrong. The words were so simple, so direct that they hit her like a physical blow. She turned to stare at him, certain she'd misheard. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, but his jaw was set. I don't know what mirrors you've been looking in, Elena, or what folks back east told you. But you're wrong. Mr. Ashford. Daniel. Daniel. She struggled to find words. I'm not fishing for compliments. I know what I am. Do you now? He did look at her then, and the intensity in those gray-blue eyes made her breath catch. Because I've been looking at you since you stepped off that stage, and I don't see plain. I see strong. I see honest. I see a woman brave enough to cross half a country to build something new. He paused and his voice dropped lower. I see beautiful. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. She wanted to argue, to explain all the ways he was mistaken, but the words wouldn't come. You don't have to believe me, Daniel said, turning back to the road. Not yet, but I'm going to keep saying it until you do. They rode in silence after that, but it was different now. Charged somehow. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, and she couldn't stop stealing glances at the man beside her. He thought she was beautiful. The idea was so foreign, so completely outside her experience, that she didn't know what to do with it. The ranch appeared gradually as they crested a long rise. A house stood in a small valley protected from the worst winds by a line of cottonwood trees along a creek. There was a barn, a corral, a chicken coop. Everything was simple but well-maintained, built by careful hands. It's not much, Daniel said as they approached, but it's solid. The house has 3 rooms, 2 for sleeping, 1 for living. There's a good stove and the roof doesn't leak. I added a window this summer. Thought you might like the light. You built this yourself. Most of it. Had help with the barn raising, but the house is my work. Elena looked at the neat logs, the careful chinking, the stone chimney rising straight and true. It's wonderful, she said softly. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, then came around to help her. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Welcome home, Elena. Home, The words settled around her like a blanket. Daniel showed her inside, carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. The house was simple, but clean floors swept the stove, blacked and gleaming. There was a table with 2 chairs, a dresser, a bed in the other room covered with a quilt in a wedding ring pattern. Everything spoke of care of a man who prepared for her arrival. I'll sleep in the barn tonight, Daniel said, setting her trunk by the dresser. Give you privacy to settle in. We can talk tomorrow about the wedding, about what you want. Elena turned to face him. He stood by the door, hat in his hands again, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. She thought about his letters, about the honesty he'd shown, the respect, about the way he'd looked at her and seen something she'd never seen in herself. She thought about spending another night alone, carrying the weight of her own doubts. What if I don't want to wait, she heard herself say. Daniel went very still. Elena, you wrote that you wanted a partner, she said, clasping her hands together to stop them trembling. Someone to build a life with. I didn't come here to be courted, Daniel. I came here to be married, to start building that life. Are you certain? His voice was rough. You've only just arrived. You barely know me. I know you built this house for us. I know you were honest in your letters when you could have lied. I know you looked at me and saw something I've never seen. She took a breath. I know I'm tired of being afraid. The silence stretched between them taut as wire. There's a minister in town, Daniel said finally. Reverend Michaels. He'd marry us if we asked. Tomorrow, if you want. Elena nodded, her heart racing. I want. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, relief and wonder, and something deeper that made heat pool in her stomach. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. His palms were warm and calloused, solid and real. I'll be a good husband to you, Elena. I swear it. I believe you. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the gesture so gentle it made her eyes sting. You should rest, he said quietly. It's been a long day. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. After he left, Elena stood in the center of the house and tried to understand what had just happened. She'd agreed to marry a man she'd met hours ago. She'd spoken her desires aloud instead of swallowing them. She'd chosen courage over caution. She unpacked her few belongings with shaking hands, hanging her dresses on pegs, arranging her brush and mirror on the dresser. When she caught sight of her reflection, she paused. The same round face looked back at her, the same plain features. But something in her eyes was different, a spark that hadn't been there before. I see beautiful, Daniel had said. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see it too. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elena woke before sunrise, dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue wool that brought out her eyes. She braided her hair and pinned it carefully, then stood before the small mirror and tried to see what Daniel saw. She still looked ordinary to herself, but perhaps that was all right. Daniel knocked softly before entering. He'd cleaned up his hair, still damp, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He held his hat and looked nervous in a way that made her smile. You look lovely, he said. Thank you. They rode to town in the wagon side by side. The morning air was crisp, smelling of sage and earth. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt comfortable now, like they were both gathering themselves for what came next. Reverend Michaels met them at the small church at the edge of town. He was an older man with kind eyes who asked no questions about their brief acquaintance, only whether they understood the commitment they were making. I do, Elena said. I do, Daniel echoed. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just 2 people standing before a minister in an empty church, speaking words that would bind them together. When Daniel slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his hand was steady. When he kissed her soft and brief, Elena felt something shift in her chest like a door opening. They were married. The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur. Elena kept looking at the ring on her finger, the proof that she was someone's wife now. That someone had chosen her. When they reached the house, Daniel helped her down from the wagon and didn't immediately let go. His hands rested on her waist, and he looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you all right? He asked. Yes. Are you so? Yes. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. More than all right. Inside, Elena moved to the stove. I should make dinner. Later. Daniel caught her hand, gently turning her to face him. I need to tell you something first. She waited, her heart racing. I know this all happened fast, he said slowly. I know you might have doubts, but I meant what I said yesterday. You're beautiful, Elena, and not just to look at, though you are, no matter what you believe. He cupped her face in his rough palm. You're beautiful in the way you were brave enough to come here, in the way you speak honestly, in the way you chose trust over fear. Elena's eyes burned. I don't understand why you see me this way. Because it's the truth. His grip tightened gently on her face. I'm not asking you to believe it overnight, but I'm going to show you. Every day, until you see yourself the way I see you. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. I want to believe you. That's enough for now. When he kissed her this time, it was different. Deeper. Full of promise and patience. Elena kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and tentative trust into it. They moved to the bedroom together, and what happened there was tender and careful. 2 strangers learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Daniel was patient when she was nervous, careful when she was uncertain. He told her she was beautiful until she almost believed it. And afterward, lying in his arms with the quilt pulled over them and the afternoon light slanting through the window, Elena felt something she'd never felt before. Seen, chosen, wanted. Perhaps this was what home felt like. The days that followed settled into rhythm. Daniel rose before dawn to tend the cattle and horses. Elena learned the routines of the ranch, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, managing the root cellar, cooking meals that would sustain a working man. The work was constant and demanding, so different from her life in Philadelphia that some days she barely recognized herself. But she was learning the land, learning the work, learning her husband. Daniel was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding the range. He built her a better clothesline without being asked. When she struggled to carry water from the creek, he rigged up a clever system of buckets and rope that made it easier. He noticed things: when she was tired, when something pleased her, when she needed space or company, and he kept his promise. Every day, in small ways and large, he showed her that he meant what he'd said. "You're getting better with the bread," he said one evening, savoring a slice with butter. "It's not as good as it should be." "It's perfect, Elena. Perfect. Perfect," he repeated firmly, "because you made it." She learned to accept his compliments even when they felt foreign. Learned to meet his eyes when he told her she looked pretty in the morning light. Learned to believe that his desire for her wasn't duty, but genuine want. And slowly, carefully, she began to want him back. At night, they would lie together in the darkness and talk about their childhoods, his on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri, hers in a crowded boarding house in Philadelphia, about the dreams that had brought them west, about the life they were building together. "I never thought I'd have this," Elena confessed one night, her head on his chest. "Have what?" "A home. A husband who—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Who loves you," Daniel supplied quietly. Her breath caught. They hadn't spoken that word yet. "Is that what this is?" she whispered. "Yes." His arms tightened around her. "I didn't expect it to happen so fast, but yes, Elena, I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "How you barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're kind to the animals. I know you hum when you're cooking. I know you watch the sunset every evening like it's a gift. I know you're stronger than you think you are." He brushed the tears from her face. "I know I want to spend every day showing you how extraordinary you are. I love you too." She breathed, the words escaping before she could think better of them. But they felt right, true. His kiss tasted like promise. Winter came hard and fast. The first snow fell in late October, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The work changed, feeding cattle through deep drifts, breaking ice on the water trough, keeping the house warm through nights when the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. It was brutal, exhausting, relentless. But they faced it together. Elena learned to read the weather, to anticipate storms before they hit. She learned to manage the stove so the fire never went out, to make meals stretch when supplies ran low, to mend and make do. She learned the strength in her own back and hands, the resilience she'd never known she possessed. And she learned that love wasn't just tender moments by firelight. It was Daniel trudging through a blizzard to check on cattle while she kept hot coffee waiting. It was holding each other for warmth on the coldest nights. It was steady presence through monotony and struggle. One particularly brutal January day, when the wind howled like something alive and the temperature was too cold to even consider going outside, they stayed in bed late. Daniel held her close, his breath warm against her hair. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming here?" Elena thought about Philadelphia, the cramped boarding house, the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and certain of her own inadequacy. "No," she said, "not for a moment. Even when it's this hard, especially then." She turned to face him. "Because I'm not alone anymore." He kissed her softly. "You'll never be alone again. I promise." The storm passed, spring came, and with it new life. Elena realized she was pregnant in late March when the snow was melting and the first green shoots were appearing. She told Daniel one evening after dinner, her hands clasped tight in her lap to stop them trembling. She watched his face carefully, afraid of disappointment, of burden. Instead, she saw wonder. "A baby," he breathed. "Yes, I think I think around harvest time. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees before her chair, taking her hands in his. Elena, my beautiful Elena. His voice broke. We made this together, she said softly. I know, but you'll carry this child, bring it into the world. You're so strong, so. He shook his head. I don't have the words. She cupped his face in her hands. You found the words when I needed them most. On that first day you told me I was beautiful when I didn't believe it. Do you believe it now? She looked into his eyes, this man who'd seen past every lie she'd told herself, who'd chosen her without hesitation, who loved her with steady constancy. Yes, she said, I'm starting to. His smile was brilliant. Good, because it's the truth. The months that followed were full of preparation. Daniel built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there wasn't a single rough edge. Elena sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving in rhythm with her growing belly. They talked about names, about the future, about all the ways their lives were about to change. The work continued harder now, with the weight she carried, but Daniel was there, lifting what was too heavy, doing what was too strenuous, caring for her with the same steady devotion he'd shown from the beginning. I can do it, she'd protest when he took over some task. I know you can, he'd say, but you don't have to, not alone. In late September, when the aspen leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp with autumn's approach, their daughter arrived. The labor was long and hard, attended by a midwife from town and punctuated by Daniel's worried pacing outside the bedroom door. But when Elena finally held that tiny, perfect girl in her arms, all the pain dissolved into wonder. Daniel knelt beside the bed, his rough hand gentle on their daughter's downy head. She's beautiful, he whispered, like her mother. She's perfect, Elena agreed. They named her Rose because that's what she was, an unexpected bloom in harsh country, beautiful and resilient. As Elena watched Daniel cradle their daughter, his eyes shining with tears, she felt something shift deep in her chest. This was what he'd given her. Not just a home or a family, but the understanding that she was worthy of both. That she had always been worthy. She just needed someone patient enough to help her see it. But winter had one more lesson to teach. In February, when Rose was 5 months old, the worst storm Elena had ever seen descended on the ranch. It came without warning, a wall of white that blotted out the world. The temperature plummeted. The wind screamed. Daniel had been out checking the herd when it hit. Elena waited by the window, Rose in her arms, watching the white void beyond the glass. An hour passed, then two. The fire in the stove crackled. Rose fussed, sensing her mother's tension. 3 hours. Elena's hands shook as she fed Rose, as she paced the floor, as she strained to hear anything beyond the howling wind. 4 hours. He's dead, whispered a voice in her mind. You've lost him. You'll be alone again. 5 hours. Elena was preparing to bundle Rose up to somehow go out into the storm herself when the door burst open. Daniel stumbled in, more ice than man. His face was white with cold, his movements clumsy. Snow clung to every inch of him. Oh God, Daniel! Elena thrust Rose into the cradle and ran to him. She stripped off his frozen coat. His ice-crusted gloves led him to the fire. His skin was like marble. Cattle, he managed through chattering teeth. Had to make sure. Damn the cattle! The words burst from her, fierce and frightened. Don't you ever scare me like that again. She rubbed his hands between hers, chafing warmth back into frozen fingers. Wrapped blankets around his shaking shoulders. Made him drink hot coffee even though he could barely hold the cup. Slowly, painfully, color returned to his face. The shaking subsided, and Elena realized she was crying. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered. I thought you were dead and I'd be alone, and I didn't know how to survive without you. Daniel pulled her into his arms despite the blankets. You were worried about me, his voice was wondering. Of course I was worried. I love you, you stubborn man. Do you think I could just... Say it again, he interrupted. What? That you love me. Say it again. I love you. The words came easier now. I love you, Daniel Ashford, and if you ever risk yourself like that again, I will. He kissed her, cutting off the threat. Kissed her until they were both breathless. I love you too, he said, against her lips. I'm sorry I scared you. I just needed to make sure the herd... The herd can freeze, Elena said fiercely. You can't. We need you. I need you. He held her close while Rose cooed softly in her cradle, while the storm raged outside, while the fire crackled warm and safe. They'd survived, together. And Elena realized something in that moment, something that went bone deep. She wasn't the same woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 7 months ago. That woman had been so afraid of loss that she'd never really believed she deserved to have anything. This woman, the one in Daniel's arms with a daughter sleeping nearby, knew different. She deserved this. Deserved love, deserved family, deserved happiness. Not because Daniel had told her so, but because she'd finally begun to believe it herself. When spring came again, melting the snow and bringing new green to the land, Elena stood on the porch one morning, watching the sunrise. Rose was 6 months old now, sleeping peacefully inside. Daniel was already out with the cattle. She looked out at the ranch, their ranch, and felt something warm and solid settle in her chest. This was hers. She'd earned it, not through beauty or charm or any of the things she'd thought mattered, but through courage, through showing up every day and doing the work, through choosing love even when she was afraid. She touched the ring on her finger, still slightly surprised to find it there after all these months. Mrs. Elena Ashford, wife, mother, partner, beautiful. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel had been right all along. Spring 1879 gave way to summer and summer to fall. Rose grew from infant to curious baby, pulling herself up on furniture and babbling nonsense that sounded almost like words. The ranch thrived under Daniel and Elena's partnership. More cattle, better yields. From the small garden, Elena had planted a smokehouse Daniel built for preserving meat. They were building something, not just a ranch, but a life. One morning in late October, Elena woke feeling strange. Not ill exactly, but different. When Daniel brought her wildflowers from the range that evening, the scent made her stomach turn. She counted back the weeks and realized. "I think I'm pregnant again," she told him that night. Daniel's face split into a grin. "You think? I'm fairly certain." He pulled her close, one hand settling protectively over her still flat belly. "Another blessing. Are you happy?" "Elena." He tilted her face up to his. "Every day with you is a gift. Every child we're blessed with is a miracle. Yes, I'm happy." Their son Michael was born in early June of 1880, a sturdy baby with Daniel's dark hair and a serious expression that made them both laugh. Rose, not quite 2, was fascinated by her baby brother. She'd sit beside his cradle for hours, pattering away in her toddler language. "She'll be a good big sister," Daniel said one evening watching them. "She will, Elena agreed, then softer. "I never imagined I could have this, all of this. You deserve it." "I'm starting to believe that." He smiled and kissed her temple. "Good." The years blurred together in the way years do when life is full of purpose and motion. Rose grew into a thoughtful child who loved to draw and sing. Michael was quiet and serious, always watching, always thinking. In 1883, their third child arrived, a daughter they named Clara, who came into the world laughing and never seemed to stop. The ranch expanded. They hired help during busy seasons, young men from town who needed work. Daniel added another room to the house, then another so the children could have space of their own. But more than the physical growth, it was the community that deepened. Elena had met Catherine Brennan shortly after arriving in Silver Creek, an Irish immigrant in her 40s with wise eyes and a quick laugh. Catherine and her husband Patrick owned the neighboring ranch to the south. Over the years, Catherine became more than a neighbor. She became a friend, a mentor, sometimes a lifeline. It was Catherine who taught Elena how to preserve vegetables from the garden. Catherine who showed her which wild herbs could be used for medicine. Catherine who sat with her through Rose's first fever, Michael's broken arm, Clara's frightening bout of croup. And it was Catherine who one afternoon in early spring of 1884 told Elena her own story. They were sitting on Elena's porch mending clothes while the children played in the yard. The cottonwoods were just beginning to leaf out that brilliant new green against blue sky. "You know," Catherine said quietly, "I was like you once." Elena looked up from the shirt she was hemming. "Like me how? Believing I wasn't enough." Catherine's hands kept moving, needle flashing in the sunlight. "I came to America during the famine. Lost my whole family on the ship. Parents, 2 brothers, baby sister. Arrived in New York with nothing but the clothes on my back and scars from the hunger." She paused, gathering thread. "Patrick found me working in a factory. I was 18, thin as a rail, half mad from grief. He was a dock worker saving every penny to go west. And for some reason I'll never understand, he looked at me, this broken, scarred thing, and saw something worth loving. Elena's throat tightened. Catherine, it took me 20 years to believe him, Catherine continued. 20 years of him telling me I was beautiful, that the scars didn't matter, that I was strong and brave and worthy. I wasted so much time, child. So much time doubting when I could have been living. She finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Don't make my mistake, Elena. That man of yours sees you clearly. Trust his vision until you can see yourself the same way. Elena thought about that conversation for days afterward. About the time Catherine had lost to doubt. About the time Elena herself had already wasted. She was 29 now. She'd been married to Daniel for nearly 6 years. And while she no longer flinched when he called her beautiful, while she no longer questioned his love, did she truly see herself the way he saw her? Or was she still deep down that frightened girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach, certain she was nothing special? The answer came in late summer of 1884, when influenza swept through the territory. It started in town and spread outward like wildfire. Within a week, half of Silver Creek was sick. Within 2 weeks, it reached the outlying ranches. Clara fell ill first, 3 years old and suddenly burning with fever. Elena sat up 3 nights straight, bathing her daughter with cool cloths, forcing water down her throat, while terror clawed at her chest. On the 4th day, Clara's fever broke. But Michael fell sick the next morning, then rose. Elena moved through those weeks in a haze of exhaustion and fear. Daniel took over all the ranch work, pushing himself to the breaking point to spare her one more burden. But she barely noticed. All her focus was on keeping her children alive. One by one they recovered, weak and hollow-eyed, but alive. Elena let herself believe the worst was over. Then Daniel collapsed. She found him in the barn one morning, unconscious in the straw. His skin was on fire. With the children barely recovered and no help available, everyone was either sick or tending the sick. Elena faced the hardest days of her life. She dragged Daniel into the house, wrestled him onto the bed, bathed him with cool water when the fever raged, forced broth between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow. She ran the ranch, tended the children, nursed her husband. She ran on coffee and determination and the bone-deep terror of losing him. The worst night came 5 days into Daniel's illness. His fever spiked so high he became delirious, thrashing in the bed, calling out for people Elena didn't know. His breathing turned shallow and labored. Elena knelt beside the bed, gripping his hand so hard her knuckles went white. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered fiercely. You promised. You promised you'd never leave me alone. So you fight Daniel Ashford. You fight for me, for our children, for everything we've built together." His eyes flickered open, glassy with fever. "Elena, I'm here, I'm right here." "So beautiful," he mumbled, "my beautiful wife." Even delirious with fever burning up from the inside, he saw her that way. Something broke open in Elena's chest. "You have to fight," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Daniel, please don't leave me. I need you, I love you, please." She laid her head on the bed beside him and prayed to a God she'd stopped addressing formally years ago. "Please, please don't take him. I'll do anything, just don't take him." The fever broke the next morning. Daniel woke weak and disoriented but lucid. When he saw Elena slumped in the chair beside the bed, dark circles under her eyes, exhaustion, written in Orion, in every line of her body, he reached for her hand. "How long?" he rasped. 6 days. "And the children?" "Better, recovering." She gripped his hand. "You scared me." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, just don't do it again." He managed a weak smile. "I'll try." Recovery was slow. It took weeks before Daniel could work a full day before his strength fully returned. The children bounced back faster as children did. But something had changed in Elena. She'd faced the possibility of losing everything: her children, her husband, the life she'd built. And she'd discovered something profound. She was strong enough to bear it. Not just survive, but actually carry the weight. Run the ranch, care for the children, nurse Daniel, make the hard decisions. All the things she'd once thought were beyond her capabilities, she'd done. Not because Daniel told her she could, but because she had to. And in doing so, she'd proven something to herself that no amount of his affirmations could have shown her. She was capable. She was resilient. She was strong. One evening after Daniel was well enough to sit at the table for dinner, after the children were in bed, Elena stood at the window looking out at the ranch. Daniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm different than I was." "How so?" She turned in his arms to face him. "I used to think I needed you to tell me I was strong, to tell me I was worthy. But these past weeks, I had to be strong whether I felt it or not. I had to be capable whether I believed it or not." She touched his face gently. "And I was. I am. You were right about me, Daniel, but I think I'm finally right about me too." His eyes shone with pride and love. "I knew you'd get there eventually. It only took 6 years. Worth every moment." He kissed her softly. "You're extraordinary, Elena Ashford, and I'm going to keep telling you that every day for the rest of our lives." "I know," she said, smiling, "and I'm finally ready to believe you." Life settled back into rhythm after the influenza epidemic. The territory began to heal. Families who'd lost loved ones mourned. Those who'd survived gave thanks. The Ashfords had been lucky they'd all survived when so many hadn't. Rose turned 6 that fall. She was beginning to learn her letters, already showing an artistic bent that reminded Elena of herself at that age. Except Rose had something Elena never had: confidence. Daniel made sure of that. Every day he told his daughter she was smart, talented, strong. He praised her drawings, encouraged her questions, listened when she talked. Michael at 4 was serious and thoughtful. He loved numbers, could count to 100, was constantly asking why about everything. Clara at 2 was pure sunshine. She laughed more than she cried, found joy in everything, and had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Elena watched Daniel with their children and felt her heart swell. This was the legacy they were building, not just the ranch, but these small humans who would carry forward everything they'd learned. Then one afternoon in early October, Rose came home from a church social in town with tear-streaked cheeks. Elena was in the garden harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost. She looked up to see her daughter running toward her, sobbing. "Rose, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" Rose threw herself into Elena's arms. "Sally Henderson said I'm too fat to be pretty. She said boys won't like me when I grow up because I'm not pretty like her." Elena's heart clenched. The pain was so familiar, it took her breath away. This was her test. The moment she'd known would come eventually. How could she teach her daughter not to make the same mistakes she had? How could she give Rose the confidence it had taken Elena decades to find? She set down her basket and pulled Rose onto her lap on the garden bench, stroking her daughter's hair while she cried. When the tears finally subsided, Elena spoke quietly. "Rose, sweetheart, look at me." Her daughter's red-rimmed eyes met hers. "Do you know what your father told me the very first day we met?" Rose shook her head. "He told me I was beautiful, and I didn't believe him. Do you know why? Why? Because I'd spent my whole life thinking I was plain and unremarkable. People had told me I wasn't pretty enough, wasn't special enough, and I believed them instead of believing the truth." Elena cupped her daughter's face gently. "It took your father years, many, many years of telling me I was beautiful before I finally believed it. And you know what? Those were wasted years, Rose. Years I spent doubting myself when I could have been happy." "But Mama," Rose sniffled, "you are beautiful." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. I finally believe that now. But I don't want you to waste years the way I did." She brushed Rose's hair back from her face. "Sally Henderson doesn't know what she's talking about. You're strong and smart and kind, and those things matter so much more than what someone like Sally thinks about how you look." "But what if she's right? What if I'm not pretty? Then you'll be brave and capable and loving instead. And those things will take you much further in life than being pretty ever could." Elena pulled her daughter close. "Don't let anyone else tell you your worth, Rose. Not Sally, not anyone. You're already extraordinary exactly as you are." Rose was quiet for a long moment, then, "Did you really not believe Pa when he said you were beautiful?" "Not at first." "That's silly, Mama. You're the most beautiful person I know." Elena's throat tightened. "That's because Pa taught me to be beautiful. Not on the outside, that was always there. I just couldn't see it. But on the inside, He taught me to be brave and honest and kind, and those things made me beautiful. Can you teach me too? Oh, sweetheart. Elena hugged her daughter tight. You already know. You're already all those things. I just need to remind you the way Pa reminded me. That evening after the children were asleep, Elena told Daniel what had happened. His face darkened. Sally Henderson said that she's 7 years old. Where does a 7-year-old learn that kind of cruelty? Probably from her mother, Elena said quietly, the same way Rose learns kindness from us. She took his hand. See, what matters is that we're teaching her differently, that we're giving her what I never had, the knowledge that her worth doesn't come from other people's opinions. Did you, did you handle it all right? Daniel asked carefully. That must have brought up hard memories. It did, Elena admitted. But you know what, I realized something. I'm not that frightened girl anymore. I can teach Rose what I learned because I finally truly learned it. She smiled at him. You did that. You gave me that gift, and now I'm passing it on. He pulled her close. You're an amazing mother. I learned from an amazing father. The seasons turned. Summer of 1885 brought drought, the worst anyone could remember. The creek ran low, the grass turned brown, the cattle grew thin. Then Patrick Brennan's barn burned. No one knew how it started. A lantern knocked over maybe, or lightning from a dry storm. Whatever the cause, by the time anyone noticed, it was too late. The barn was a total loss. Worse, it held most of the Brennan's winter store's hay grain, preserved food. Everything gone. Patrick and Catherine stood in the ashes, faces gray with shock. Daniel didn't hesitate. We'll help. That afternoon, he and Elena went through their own stores, setting aside what they could spare. It would make their own winter tighter, but the Brennans had helped them in when Rose was born, when Elena had been too weak to manage the household. You didn't forget that kind of kindness. Rose, Michael, and Clara watched as their parents loaded the wagon. Why are we giving our food away? Michael asked, his serious face concerned. Elena knelt beside her son. Because the Brennans need it more than we do right now. But what if we run out this winter? Then we'll make do, Daniel said. That's what neighbors do, son. When one family falls, the others lift them up. But that's not fair, Rose said. They didn't do anything wrong. The fire wasn't their fault. Elena took her daughter's hand. You're right, sweetheart. It's not fair. Life isn't always fair. What matters is what we do when unfair things happen. How we help. How we show up for each other. They delivered the supplies that evening. Other neighbors were there too. The Mitchells with lumber, the Hendersons with hay, the Petersons with tools to help rebuild. This was how it worked out here. When disaster struck, the community rallied. Catherine wept when she saw the wagon full of supplies. You didn't have to. Yes, we did, Elena said firmly, embracing her friend. Patrick shook Daniel's hand, too overcome to speak. On the way home, Rose was quiet in the back of the wagon. What are you thinking about Rosebud? Daniel asked. How fast everything can change, Rose said softly. The Brennans built that barn with their own hands. Papa Patrick told me about it once, and now it's just gone in one night. That's why we help each other, Elena said gently, turning to look at her daughter. Because we all know it could be us tomorrow. None of us are safe from bad luck or hard times, but together we can survive things that would break us alone. Rose nodded slowly, absorbing this. Elena saw her daughter growing up in real-time childhood certainties, giving way to harder truths. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel found Elena in the kitchen, staring out the window at the dark shapes of their own barn, their own stores. We gave them a lot, he said quietly. We'll feel it this winter. I know. No regrets. Elena turned to look at him. None. We have each other. We have our children. We have this ranch. The Brennans have nothing right now except what we and the other neighbors gave them. She crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. You taught me that you know, that wealth isn't what you have in your storehouses. It's what you have in your heart, in your community. Pretty sure you taught me that, Daniel said, kissing her forehead. Then we taught each other. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other, while the children slept safely nearby. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human joy and suffering. But inside, there was warmth. There was love. There was family. And Elena realized with a clarity that took her breath away that she had everything she'd never dared to dream of. Not because she'd become beautiful by conventional standards, but because she'd learned to see beauty in what mattered in strength, in kindness, in showing up for the people you loved, even when it was hard. Daniel had seen that in her from the very first moment. It had just taken her 7 years to see it too. But life, Elena was learning, had a way of testing you just when you thought you understood the lessons. It was a Tuesday in late September when a stranger rode up to the ranch. Elena was hanging laundry, Rose helping her by handing up clothespins. Michael and Clara were playing in the dirt nearby building what Michael solemnly declared was a fort. The rider was well-dressed by frontier standards, clean suit, polished boots, a horse that looked too fine for ranch country. Something about him made Elena's stomach clench. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the stranger said, tipping his hat. "I'm looking for Daniel Ashford. He's out with the cattle. Can I help you with something?" The man's eyes swept over her, the worn dress, the clothesline, the children, and his expression shifted into something Elena recognized. Something that made her feel small. Dismissal. "I'll wait for Mr. Ashford if you don't mind." Elena's first instinct was to invite him in, offer coffee, but something stopped her. "You can wait on the porch," she said evenly. "I'll send someone to fetch my husband when he returns." The stranger looked surprised. Clearly, he'd expected her to be more accommodating. But he nodded and dismounted. Elena finished hanging the laundry, hyper-aware of the stranger's presence. Rose stuck close to her side, sensing her mother's tension. When Daniel finally rode in an hour later, he saw the stranger immediately. His face went carefully blank, an expression Elena had never seen before. "Edward," Daniel said flatly. The stranger stood. "Hello, old friend." "We're not friends." Daniel dismounted but didn't approach. "What are you doing here?" Elena's pulse quickened. Daniel never spoke with that edge in his voice. "Is that any way to greet an old acquaintance?" Edward smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I happened to be passing through on business. Thought I'd stop by and see how you were getting on." "I'm getting on fine. You can leave now." Edward's smile widened. "Still as hospitable as ever, I see." His gaze slid to Elena. "Though I see you've done well for yourself. A wife, children, a decent spread. Quite the accomplishment for a man running from his past." Elena's blood went cold. Running from his spine, Daniel's jaw tightened. "Elena, take the children inside." "Daniel, please." There was something in his voice she'd never heard before. Not anger exactly, but something sharp and dangerous. Rose picked up on it too. "Mama." "Come on, sweetheart," Elena said quietly, gathering her children. "Let's go inside." But she stopped at the door, listening. "What do you want, Edward?" Daniel's voice was low and hard. "What makes you think I want anything? Maybe I'm just being friendly." "You've never been friendly a day in your life. You're here for a reason. State it and leave." There was a pause, then Edward laughed, a cold sound. "There's a mining company interested in this land. They found evidence of copper deposits. They're willing to pay very well for the property." "I'm not selling." "Don't be hasty. We're talking about real money, Daniel. Enough to set you up somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows who you really are." "Get off my land. You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding." Daniel's voice rose. "I'm living. I built this ranch with my own hands. I have a wife and children here. This is my home." "Does your wife know?" Edward's voice turned sly. "Does she know about Philadelphia, about why you really ran west?" Elena's heart hammered. What was he talking about? "That's none of your damn business," Daniel said. "Oh, I think it is. I think she deserves to know that the man she married—" "Enough," Elena had never heard Daniel shout before. "You need to leave." Daniel continued, his voice shaking now. "Right now. And you can tell whoever sent you that I'm not selling. Not to them, not to anyone. This land is mine and it's staying mine." There was a long silence. Then Edward's voice, quiet and menacing. "That's a shame, because they're not the kind of people who take no for an answer. And accidents happen, Daniel. Barns burn, cattle stray. Sometimes people get hurt." "Is that a threat?" "It's a friendly warning from an old acquaintance." Elena heard the sound of boots on wood, a horse being mounted. "Think about my offer," Edward called out, "before something unfortunate happens." Then hoofbeats fading into the distance. Elena waited a moment, then stepped outside. Daniel stood in the yard, shoulders rigid, staring after the departed rider. "Daniel." He turned and she saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Fear. We need to talk, he said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. Daniel's hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. Elena waited, her heart pounding. I haven't been entirely honest with you, Daniel said finally. Not about who I am, but about where I came from. Elena's throat tightened. All right, my name is Daniel Ashford. That's true, Ashford was my mother's maiden name. But I wasn't always just a rancher. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I came from money, Elena. My father owned a shipping business in Philadelphia. We were wealthy. Philadelphia, the word hung between them. I left 7 years ago, took my mother's name and came west because I couldn't live that life anymore. The expectations, the social climbing, the way people were valued for their money instead of their character. He paused, gathering himself. My father wanted me to marry a woman from another wealthy family, consolidate business interests. I refused. We fought. I left. Daniel's hands tightened around the cup. I wanted to build something with my own hands, something that mattered. So I came here and started over. Elena processed this slowly. Why didn't you tell me? Because it doesn't matter. That's not who I am anymore. I'm not running from anything shameful. I just wanted a different life. But Edward knows. Edward worked for my father. He was always sniffing around for business opportunities, ways to make money off other people's work. Daniel's jaw clenched. I should have known he'd find me eventually. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you remember what I wrote in my very first letter to you? Daniel looked confused by the change of subject. You described yourself as plain. I also wrote that I had no family, that my parents were dead. She met his eyes. That was true, but I didn't tell you why I left Philadelphia, why I was so desperate to start over somewhere no one knew me. Now it was Daniel's turn to wait. 3 years before I wrote to you, I was engaged. The words came hard. To a man named Edward Whitmore. We were weeks from the wedding when he called it off. He'd met someone else, someone prettier from a better family. Elena's hands trembled slightly. The scandal destroyed what little social standing my family had. My mother died of shame within the year. My father followed 6 months later. I was left with nothing, no family, no prospects, no future. Just the weight of being the woman who wasn't good enough to keep her fiancé. Daniel's face had gone pale. Edward Whitmore, the man who was just here, is the same Edward who left me at the altar. Elena finished quietly. Small world, isn't it? They stared at each other across the table. Then simultaneously they both started laughing. It was half hysterical, the laughter of people who just realized the absurdity of their situation. We're both running, Daniel said finally. We're both starting over, Elena corrected. There's a difference. She reached across the table and took his hands. You were afraid to tell me about your past because you thought it would change how I see you. I was afraid to tell you about mine for the same reason. She squeezed his hands. But it doesn't change anything, Danielle. You're still the man who built this ranch with his own hands. The man who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. The man I love. And you're the bravest woman I've ever known, Daniel said, his voice rough. Coming here despite everything you'd been through. Building a life from nothing. Being willing to trust again. We've both been brave, Elena said softly. And we've both been honest where it mattered with each other about who we are now. The past is just the past. Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms. I love you, Elena Ashford. I love you too. And they held each other in the quiet kitchen, two people who'd fled their pasts and found their futures in each other. What are we going to do about Edward? Elena asked finally. About the mining company. We fight, Daniel said simply. This is our home, our children's future. We don't give it up because some company wants what's ours. How do we fight a mining company? The same way we've survived everything else. He pulled back to look at him, together, with the community's help. Elena nodded slowly. An idea was forming. Then we need to talk to the neighbors, warn them. If the mining company is threatening us, they'll threaten others too. You're right. Daniel looked at her with something like wonder. When did you get so strategic? I learned from watching you. She smiled slightly. And from 7 years of surviving out here, I'm not that frightened girl from Philadelphia anymore, Daniel. No, he agreed, you're not. The next Sunday after church, Elena and Daniel spoke with their neighbors. They weren't the only ones who'd been approached by the mining company or threatened when they refused to sell. Patrick Brennan had been offered money for his land just days before the barn fire. The Mitchells had found fences, cut and cattle missing. The Petersons had been told their water source would be accidentally contaminated if they didn't cooperate. A pattern emerged. The mining company wanted a large swath of land, and they weren't above using intimidation to get it. We need to stand together, Daniel said to the gathering of ranchers. Separately, they can pick us off one by one. Together, we're harder to break. Easy to say, Tom Peterson said grimly. Hard to do when your livelihood's at stake. That's exactly why we have to do it. Elena spoke up. Everyone turned to look at her. She rarely spoke at these gatherings. They're counting on us being too afraid to fight back, too isolated. If we unite, if we make it clear, we won't be bullied. They'll just use more force, someone said. Maybe Catherine Brennan said, her Irish accent sharp. Or maybe they'll realize it's more trouble than it's worth. But either way, I'd rather go down fighting than roll over like a beaten dog. There were murmurs of agreement. We should talk to the sheriff, another rancher suggested. This is extortion. Sheriff's in their pocket, Patrick said darkly. Seen him taking money from their man. Then we go higher, Daniel said. Territorial governor, federal marshal if we have to. They formed a plan that day. They'd document every threat, every incident. They'd refuse all offers, no matter how generous. They'd protect each other's property, taking turns on watch. And they'd send a delegation to the territorial capital to demand investigation. It was a gamble. It might not work, but it was better than surrender. 2 weeks later, Elena was in town buying supplies when she saw Edward Whitmore on the boardwalk. He saw her at the same moment. Something flickered across his face, surprise, then recognition, then a cold satisfaction that made her skin crawl. Elena Moore, he said, approaching. Or I suppose it's Elena Ashford now. She could have run, could have pretended not to know him. Instead, she stood her ground. Edward, I must say I was surprised to learn you'd ended up out here. I'd heard you disappeared after our unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Elena's voice was flat. Is that what you call abandoning your fiancé a week before the wedding? I made the right choice, clearly. His eyes swept over her dismissively. You've done well for yourself, considering. Found a man desperate enough to take damaged goods. The old Elena, the one who'd stepped off the stagecoach 7 years ago, would have crumbled under those words. Would have believed them, internalized them, let them confirm every terrible thing she'd ever thought about herself. But that Elena was gone. Damaged goods, she repeated quietly, then louder. You know what I was, Edward Young, naive, willing to settle for a man who valued social standing over character. People on the boardwalk were starting to notice the confrontation. Good. You did me a favor, Elena continued, her voice clear and caring. When you left me, you freed me to find someone who actually saw my worth, who valued honesty over beauty, strength over status, partnership over possession. Edward's face darkened. That's a pretty story, but we both know the truth. The truth is that you're working for a mining company that's trying to steal people's land through intimidation and threats. Elena cut him off. The truth is that you've spent your life taking advantage of people weaker than you, and now you've run into people who aren't weak anymore. She stepped closer, and Edward actually stepped back. You thought I was forgettable, Edward. Plain, unremarkable, nothing special. You know what, you were wrong. Not because I changed, because you never really saw me at all. You only saw what you thought I should be. Elena's voice gentled, but didn't lose its steel. My husband sees me, really sees me. Every day for 7 years, he's seen exactly who I am and loved me for it. Can you say the same about anyone in your life? Edward's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. Stay away from my family, Elena said quietly. Stay away from our land. And tell your employers that this community won't be bullied. We're stronger together than you are with all your money and threats. She turned and walked away head high, leaving him standing on the boardwalk. Her hands were shaking, but she felt powerful, free. She'd faced the man who'd made her feel worthless, and she'd shown him and herself that his opinion had no power over her anymore. Catherine Brennan caught up with her at the general store. I saw that, she said quietly, eyes shining with pride. That was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. I should have done it years ago. You did it when you were ready. That's what matters. Catherine squeezed her hand. You've come a long way, child. Elena thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach, certain she'd disappoint everyone. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I have. Word of Elena's confrontation with Edward spread through the community. It became a rallying point. If Elena Ashford could stand up to them, so could others. The mining company's tactics became more aggressive. Fences were cut, water sources poisoned, barns threatened, but the community held firm. Daniel and the other ranchers took turns on night watch protecting each other's property. The women coordinated supplies, making sure no family went without. The children were kept close to home safe. It was exhausting, frightening, the pressure constant, but they didn't break. Finally, in late November, the delegation returned from the territorial capital with a federal marshal. He'd been investigating the mining company for illegal land acquisition practices in other territories. The evidence the ranchers provided, carefully documented threats, witness testimonies, proof of Edward's involvement, was exactly what he needed. The mining company's operation was shut down. Their representatives, including Edward, were arrested. The threat was over. The night they received the news, Elena and Daniel sat on their porch while the children slept inside. The first snow of winter was falling, soft and quiet. We did it, Daniel said quietly. We actually did it. The community did it. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. We couldn't have done it alone. You were right about that, about standing together. He kissed her temple. You were right about a lot of things. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence watching the snow fall. Elena, thank you. She turned to look at him. For what? For being brave enough to come here 7 years ago. For choosing to trust me. For building this life with me. His voice roughened. For becoming the woman I always knew you could be. I didn't become her Daniel. I just learned to see her. Elena touched his face. You held up the mirror until I was ready to look. And now I see what you've always seen, a woman who's strong enough to stand up to her past, capable enough to run a ranch and raise children and fight for what matters, worthy of being loved. She smiled. Beautiful. His eyes shone in the lamplight. Yes, all of that and more. They kissed dearly, snow falling around them, the ranch quiet and safe under winter's blanket. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Around them, their community rested secure in the knowledge that they'd faced a threat together and won. This was what they'd built. Not just a ranch, not just a family, but a life that mattered. A life built on seeing each other clearly and choosing to love what they saw. And Elena knew with a certainty that went bone deep that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. Spring came again, as it always did. The snow melted, the creek swelled, and life returned to the land in shades of green. Elena discovered she was pregnant in April. Their fourth child, unexpected but welcomed, would arrive in late fall. We're going to need another room, Daniel said, his hand resting on her still flat belly. We are, Elena agreed, then softer. Are you happy, Elena? He tilted her face up to his. Every day with you is a gift. Every child we're blessed with is a miracle. Yes, I'm happy. Are you? She thought about it honestly. 4 children, a ranch that demanded constant work. The memory of the mining company's threats still fresh, but also a husband who loved her completely. Children who were growing strong and confident. A community that had stood together. A life she'd built with her own hands. Yes, she said, I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. Their son Samuel was born in October 1885, a quiet baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him. Rose at 7 was a devoted big sister. Michael at 5 took his role as protective brother seriously. Clara at 3 was fascinated by the new baby and had to be constantly reminded to be gentle. The house was full, the work was endless, the nights were short. Elena had never been more exhausted or more content in her life. One evening, after finally getting all 4 children to sleep, she collapsed on the porch beside Daniel. I'm too old for this, she said, only half joking. She was 35 now, and her body reminded her of every one of those years. You're perfect, Daniel said automatically. I'm exhausted. You're beautifully exhausted. Despite her tiredness, Elena laughed. You're impossible. I'm consistent. He pulled her close. 35 looks good on you, Elena Ashford. Liar. Never. He kissed her soundly. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Not particularly, she said, but she was smiling. I see a woman who's given me 4 incredible children, who's built a ranch and a home and a life from nothing, who stood up to her past and won, who gets more beautiful every year I know her. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what I see when I look at you is what? Everything I never knew I needed. Everything that makes life worth living. She turned in his arms to face him. Thank you for being patient with me, for never giving up on showing me who I really was. You did the hard work of seeing it. We did it together. Yes, he agreed. Together, always together. Inside, one of the babies started crying. Elena sighed. Duty calls. I'll get him. Daniel stood helping her up. You rest. She watched him go inside this man who still after 7 years made her heart skip. She'd crossed 2,000 miles believing she was nothing special. She'd found a man who saw her as extraordinary. And in learning to see herself through his eyes, she'd discovered something profound. She was both. Nothing special and extraordinary at the same time. Just a woman doing her best, building a life, loving her family. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The years spun forward like pages turning. Rose grew into a thoughtful young woman with an artist's soul and her mother's quiet strength. She never struggled with self-doubt the way Elena had. Daniel had made sure of that, raising his daughter to know her worth from the very beginning. Michael discovered a gift for mathematics and a love of teaching. At 16, he announced he wanted to attend college to become a school teacher. Not ranching, Daniel asked carefully. I love this place, Pa, Michael said. But it's not my calling. I want to teach children, help them learn and grow. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then that's what you should do. Your mother and I are proud of you. Clara Wild and Sonny declared at 15 that she wanted to be a missionary teacher, bringing education to remote communities. Samuel, the quiet observant, surprised them all by becoming the most natural rancher of the 4. At 14, he could already work alongside Daniel, anticipating what needed to be done before being asked. At least one of them wants the ranch, Daniel joked one evening. They all want what's right for them, Elena said. That's what we raised them to do, know themselves well enough to follow their own paths. When did you get so wise? I learned from you. Pretty sure it's the other way around. Their 25th anniversary arrived in the fall of 1903. Rose was 24 now, married to a kind young man named Thomas Fletcher. They had 2 children of their own. Michael was away at teaching college. Clara was preparing to leave for missionary training. Samuel at 18 was increasingly taking over ranch operations as Daniel's energy waned. Daniel had aged in the way men do when they've spent decades doing hard physical labor. His hair was fully gray now, his face deeply lined, his hands gnarled with arthritis. But his eyes were still that stormy gray blue, still looked at Elena like she hung the moon. For their anniversary, Daniel surprised Elena with a trip to Silver Creek, a night at the hotel restaurant, a rare extravagance. Elena wore her best dress and let Rose help arrange her hair. At 45, she was no longer young. Gray streaked her dark hair, lines marked her face, her figure had softened with 4 pregnancies and age. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw what Daniel saw, a woman who'd lived fully loved, deeply built something that mattered. Over roast beef and potatoes, Daniel pulled out a small wrapper package. You didn't have to get me anything, Elena protested. Open it. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. When Elena opened it, she found 2 tiny photographs, one of Daniel, one of herself taken a few years ago. So you always have me close, Daniel said softly, and so you can see yourself the way I see you. Elena looked at the photograph of herself, saw the lines around her eyes, the softness of her face, the plain features she'd spent so much of her life deprecating. But she also saw something else, strength in her gaze, quiet confidence in her bearing, the evidence of a life fully lived. I'm starting to see it, she said, tears falling. Finally, I look at this picture and I see someone worth loving. Daniel's voice was gruff with emotion. About time. She stood and went to him, kissing him soundly in the middle of the restaurant, not caring who saw. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you so much, it scares me sometimes. Good, he said. That's exactly how it should be. That night, lying in the hotel bed, such a luxury, Elena thought about the girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach 25 years ago. That girl felt like a stranger now. Someone Elena remembered fondly but could barely recognize. She'd become someone else through the years, someone stronger, braver, more certain of her place in the world. And it had all started with a man who'd looked at her and seen a beauty where she'd seen only plainness. Thank you, she whispered in the darkness. For what? Daniel murmured, half asleep. For seeing me. His arm tightened around her, always. But time, Elena had learned, was both gift and thief. Daniel's health began to fail in subtle ways at first. He tired more easily, needed to rest in the middle of tasks that once wouldn't have winded him. His hands shook, sometimes making fine work difficult. At 54, he was no longer young. The decades of hard ranch work had taken their toll. Elena watched these changes with growing fear, but she kept her voice steady, helped when he needed it, gave space when he didn't, never suggested he was less than the strong man she'd always known. One morning she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. I can't button my shirt, he said quietly. My fingers won't cooperate. Elena knelt before him and carefully buttoned each button, her own hands steady despite the way her heart was breaking. There, she said when she finished, handsome as ever. I'm falling apart, Elena. You're getting older. We both are. That's not the same as falling apart. She cupped his face in her hands. You're still you, Daniel. Still the man who saw me clearly 30 years ago. Still the man who built this ranch. Still the man I love more than anything. I don't want you to have to take care of me. Why not? She used his own words from decades ago when their positions had been reversed. You've been taking care of me for 30 years. It's my turn now. We're partners, remember. We take care of each other. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, trembling. The strong man finally allowing himself to be vulnerable. I'm scared, he whispered. I'm scared of leaving you. Elena's voice was fierce. Then don't. Stay with me. Fight. We're not done yet, Daniel Ashford. He did fight through that winter and into spring, but the decline continued inexorable as the seasons. Rose and Thomas moved back to the ranch with their children in the spring of 1905, taking over most of the operations. The house filled with noise again, grandchildren running wild, multiple generations under one roof. The role reversal was complete now. Elena made the decisions, ran the household, managed what Daniel could no longer do. He struggled with feeling useless, with losing his purpose. Your worth isn't in what you do, Elena told him gently, using his own lessons. It's in who you are. You're still the center of this family, Daniel. You're still teaching our grandchildren. You're still my whole heart. Powerful moments emerged from the struggle, Daniel teaching their granddaughter Lily to paint with watercolors, his shaking hands guided by hers. Elena running the ranch with quiet competence, finally trusting her own judgment completely. Samuel stepping into the role of head rancher, Daniel coaching from the porch. The grandchildren reading to Daniel from books he loved, keeping him company. It wasn't the life they'd imagined, but it was theirs, and they faced it together. Spring of 1907 brought cherry blossoms and birdsong, and Daniel's final decline. He was bedridden now. His breathing labored, his body failing piece by piece, but his mind remained sharp and his love remained constant. One evening after the children and grandchildren had said goodnight, Daniel asked Elena to close the door. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice weak but steady. Something I never said. Elena settled beside him on the bed, taking his hand. All right. That first day when you stepped off the stagecoach, I wasn't just being kind when I called you beautiful. Daniel, let me finish. He squeezed her hand gently. I'd seen your photograph weeks before. Remember the one you sent with your first letter? The one you said made you look worse than reality. Elena remembered. She'd hated that photograph, had almost not sent it. I didn't hate it, Daniel continued. I looked at it for hours. Do you know what I saw? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Not your features, your eyes. They held so much pain, Elena, so much longing to be seen. I recognized it because I'd felt it too, in my own way, the loneliness of not being valued for who you really are. His thumb stroked her knuckles. I thought, here's someone real, someone honest about being broken. And that's when I knew you were beautiful, before I ever met you. Because honesty like that requires courage most people don't have. Tears streamed down Elena's face. You chose me because I was broken. I chose you because you were honest about being broken, and I knew that honesty would make you strong enough to heal. He smiled faintly. I was right, wasn't I? You were right about everything. Not everything. I told you it would take decades for you to believe me. I hoped you'd get there faster. 25 years, Elena said, half laughing, half crying. That's how long it took. Worth every moment. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, storing up each other's presence. I love you, Elena Ashford, Daniel said finally. You've been the greatest gift of my life. I love you too, so much. She leaned down to kiss him softly. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for being brave enough to let me see you. Daniel died on a clear morning in May with Elena holding his hand and spring sunlight streaming through the window. His last words were beautiful, so beautiful. And then he was gone. The grief was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on Elena's chest until she couldn't breathe. She sat beside his body for hours, holding his hand, unwilling to let go. Rose finally had to lead her away, had to help her wash and dress, while Samuel and Thomas prepared Daniel's body for burial. The funeral was held on the hill overlooking the ranch where cottonwoods rustled in the breeze, and you could see everything Daniel had built. The whole community turned out. Person after person spoke about Daniel's integrity, his kindness, his quiet strength. But it was Lily Rose's 7-year-old daughter who said what Elena couldn't. My grandpa always said our grandma was beautiful. He said it every single day. And he said real beauty was about being strong and kind and brave. The child's voice was clear and steady. Grandpa was beautiful too, the most beautiful person I ever knew. Elena stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh earth that covered the man she'd loved for nearly 30 years. You were right, she whispered. You were right about everything. I am strong, I am worthy, and you made me believe it. Her voice broke. But I don't know how to do this without you, Daniel. I don't know how to be whole when half of me is gone. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. In her memory, his voice was clear. You're the strongest person I know. You'll manage. So she would try me. For him, for their children, for the life they'd built together. She would try to keep living. The weeks after Daniel's death blurred together into a gray haze. Elena moved through the motions, rising and dressing, eating when Rose insisted, but nothing felt real. The house was full of people trying to help, but all she wanted was silence and the impossible return of her world. Nights were worst. She'd reach out in the darkness, expecting to find him, and the empty space beside her was a fresh wound every time. 2 weeks after the funeral, Rose found Elena at the kitchen window staring out at the ranch with hollow eyes. Mama, you need to eat something. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten in 2 days. Elena's voice broke. I just need him back. Rose wrapped her arms around her mother, and Elena finally collapsed. She sobbed against her daughter's shoulder, releasing some of the grief she'd been holding so tightly. When the storm finally passed, Rose knelt beside Elena's chair and took her hands. Pa made you promise to keep living, Rose said gently, to remember who you are. I don't know who I am without him. Yes, you do. Rose's voice was firm but loving. You're the woman who crossed half a country alone, who built this ranch from nothing, who raised 4 children, who taught me I was worth loving exactly as I am. She squeezed Elena's hands. You're all of that, Mama. You always were. Pa just helped you see it, but it was always you. Elena looked at her daughter's face, so earnest, so full of love, and felt something shift in her chest. Rose was right. Daniel had taught her to see her own worth. But if she let grief erase all of that, she'd be dishonoring everything he'd given her. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try to keep living. That's all anyone can ask. Slowly, painfully, Elena emerged from the fog of acute grief. She began walking along the creek, the same path she and Daniel had walked countless times. She visited his grave and talked to him about the children, the ranch, how much she missed him. She started eating regularly again, sleeping without crying herself unconscious first. She began helping Rose with the household management, spending time with her grandchildren, tending her garden. The grief didn't disappear. She didn't expect it to, but it became something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. She learned to live with the empty space beside her, to find joy in memories rather than only pain and loss. One evening, Lily found Elena on the porch at sunset. "Can I sit with you, Grandma?" "Of course, sweetheart." The child climbed into Elena's lap. They watched the sky turn pink and gold in silence. "I miss Grandpa," Lily said quietly. "I do too, every single day. Mama says he's in heaven now. I hope so. Do you think he can still see us?" Elena considered the question. "I think if there's any way possible, he's watching over us, making sure we're all right." "What do you think he sees when he looks at you?" The question caught Elena off guard. She looked down at her granddaughter's innocent, curious face. "I think," Elena said slowly, "he sees the same thing he always saw. Someone he loved, someone he believed was beautiful." "You are beautiful, Grandma, just like Grandpa always said." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. Will you tell me a story about when you and Grandpa were young?" So Elena did. She told Lily about stepping off the stagecoach, terrified and certain she'd be a disappointment. About Daniel looking at her and seeing something she couldn't see in herself. About the simple wedding and the slow building of trust and love. About all the ways he'd shown her day after day that she was worthy of being chosen. Lily listened with rapt attention. When the story was finished, she said, "I want someone to love me like that someday." "You will, sweetheart, and you'll deserve it because you're already learning to see your own worth. You won't waste years doubting yourself like I did." "That's because Grandpa taught you, and you and Mama are teaching me." Elena hugged her granddaughter close, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. This was Daniel's legacy too. Not just the ranch or the children, but the lessons he'd taught that were being passed down through generations. The understanding that worth came from character, that beauty was more than appearance, that love meant seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. Years passed. Elena aged from 57 to 60, then 65, then 70. Her body grew frail, her hands gnarled with arthritis, her steps slower and more careful. But her mind remained sharp and her heart remained full. She still missed Daniel. The ache never fully disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, not forgetting but remembering with gratitude rather than only loss. She could think of him now and smile, could remember moments that brought joy rather than pain. She watched her grandchildren grow into adults. Rose's daughter Lily became a confident young woman who knew her worth. The other grandchildren, 8 in total now, from all 4 of her children, came to visit regularly, bringing life and laughter to the ranch. Elena became the keeper of stories, the one who remembered the early days and could tell the children about their grandfather. She described Daniel's integrity, his quiet strength, his unwavering belief in the worth of every person. And always she'd tell them about love, about being seen, about choosing and being chosen. One spring morning in 1922, Elena woke feeling strange. Not ill exactly, but different. Tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. She rose slowly and dressed, then walked outside to watch the sunrise. The world was beautiful in the early light. The cottonwoods were leafing out in brilliant green. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The ranch, her ranch, Daniel's ranch, their children's ranch, thrived. Elena made her way slowly to Daniel's grave, settling onto the bench Rose had built beside his headstone years ago. "Good morning, my love," she said, as she had done nearly every day for 15 years. "It's a beautiful day, the kind you always loved." She sat in companionable silence, feeling the sun's warmth on her face. "I've been thinking about that first day," she began, "when I stepped off the stagecoach absolutely terrified. I was so certain I'd be a disappointment to you, so certain that when you saw me, really saw me, you'd regret everything." She touched the headstone gently. "Instead, you looked at me and saw everything I couldn't see in myself, and you never stopped looking at me that way. Not for 32 years. Not for a single day." The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. "You were right about everything you know. You were right when you said I was beautiful. Right when you said I was strong. Right when you said I just needed to learn to see myself clearly. Elena paused, gathering her thoughts. It took me so long to believe you. Too long, probably. But I got there eventually, didn't I? And Daniel, that gift you gave me, teaching me my own worth, I passed it on. Rose knows. The grandchildren know. They won't waste years doubting themselves the way I did. She sat quietly watching the play of light on the creek below. I'm tired, my love. So tired. And I miss you. I missed you every single day for 15 years. But I kept my promise. I lived. I really lived. The weariness settled deeper into her bones, but it wasn't frightening. It felt almost like peace. I think I'm ready now. Ready to rest. Ready to see you again, if that's possible. I hope it is. I hope you're waiting somewhere ready to tell me I'm beautiful one more time. Elena leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes against the bright morning sun. In her mind, she could hear his voice as clearly as if he stood beside her. You're wrong about yourself, Elena. You're wrong. And she smiled because after 30 years of patient teaching, she'd finally learned he was right. I love you, she whispered. I'll see you soon. The sun climbed higher, warming the spring air. Elena's breathing grew slower, more peaceful. She thought about her life. All 74 years of it. The struggles and triumphs. The children raised the grandchildren who carried pieces of her and Daniel forward. The ranch built with calloused hands and stubborn determination. But mostly she thought about love, about a man who'd seen past every lie she'd told herself, who'd chosen her deliberately and completely, who'd spent 3 decades teaching her that worth wasn't about appearance or perfection, but about character and courage and the decision to keep showing up. She'd been blessed, so incredibly impossibly blessed. Rose found her there, hours later, sitting peacefully on the bench, her hand resting on Daniel's headstone. At first, she thought her mother was simply resting, but when she drew closer, she understood. Elena had gone to join her husband. They buried Elena beside Daniel on the hill overlooking the ranch. The whole community gathered, once again a smaller gathering than before, as many of the original settlers had passed, but no less loving. Rose spoke through her tears. My mother believed for most of her life that she was ordinary. She came west thinking she'd be lucky if anyone wanted her. But my father saw what she couldn't, that she was extraordinary. He spent 32 years teaching her that truth, and she spent the last 15 years of her life proving she'd learned it. Rose's voice strengthened. She taught us, all her children, her grandchildren, that our worth doesn't come from how we look or what others think of us. It comes from who we are and how we love. She learned that lesson from my father, and she made sure we all learned it too. Lily, now a woman of 32 with children of her own, stood to speak next. My grandmother gave me something more important than a name. She taught me to see myself clearly, to know my worth, to believe I deserve to be loved exactly as I am. Her voice was steady despite her tears. She learned that from my grandfather. And together they created something that goes beyond this ranch or even this family. They showed us all what it means to truly see another person, to love not despite flaws, but because of the whole complete imperfect humanity of someone. Years later, when the ranch had passed to the next generation and the next, when the frontier had long since become settled and tamed, the story of Elena and Daniel still lived on. It was told to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The story of a woman who thought she was ordinary and a man who showed her she was extraordinary. Of love that began with being truly seen and grew through decades of choosing each other. Of a partnership that transformed not just 2 lives, but generations. On the hill where they rested together, wildflowers bloomed every spring as if the land itself remembered the love that had shaped it. Because that's what their story was really about. Not romance or grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the quiet revolutionary act of seeing another person clearly, flaws and all, and choosing to love them anyway. Of helping someone see their own worth when they'd spent years believing they had none. Of building a life together one day at a time through struggle and joy, loss and triumph. Elena had crossed 2,000 miles believing she was plain, unremarkable, forgettable. She'd found a man who saw her as beautiful, extraordinary, unforgettable. And in learning to see herself through his eyes, she discovered a truth that echoed through generations. That being seen, truly, completely, honestly seen, was its own kind of miracle. That love wasn't about perfection, but about someone choosing you deliberately and showing up every day to prove it. That worth wasn't something you earned or achieved, but something inherent that the right person could help you recognize. And that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with someone simply looking at you and seeing what you couldn't see in yourself, and never, ever stopping. Thank you so much for staying with me through Elena and Daniel's journey. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another person is simply to see them, really see them and love what we see. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories about love, courage, and the strength we find in each other. Drop a comment and tell me who in your life sees you the way Daniel saw Elena, who helps you recognize your own worth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're extraordinary, even if they don't believe it yet. Until next time, remember, you are seen, you are worthy, you are beautiful exactly as you are.